Hello and welcome to another episode of the Midierror Meets podcast in association with Sonic State, talking to all kinds of people who work in sound and music. On the show this time, we've got Robin Rimbaud, aka Scanner, someone I'm sure you'll be very familiar with. He's been a pivotal contributor to the electronic music scene for many years, since the 80s. Making all kinds of albums, as well as scoring films, scoring ballets, making installations, concept art. He's done it all, and he's also worked with the likes of Laurie Anderson, Steve McQueen, and was influenced by the likes of Steve Reich, Brian Eno, and other people in the electronic scene. You can support Sonic State on Patreon. It helps to keep us doing what we do. So go over to sonicstate.com/Patreon to give us a little bit of support. We'd really appreciate that. But let's get on to the interview. The first thing I asked Robin was about his surroundings.
I am in the East Midlands on the very bottom end, almost in Bedfordshire, and I'm in an old textile factory. It's a building they used to make men's suits and women's stockings. I don't know where these things happened, on which particular floor, but it's a large old industrial building, and I've been here now 10 years. This is the second floor. You can't really see. There's a mezzanine up there, and there's a kind of library back there with lots of books. You can kind of maybe see them here. And this is the studio, it's about 5 meters high, the ceiling. It's all wooden. I was nervous about the acoustics here, and I did one of those fantastic tests you have with the test microphone, moved around the space, and actually it said it was okay because there were so many books on the other side of this screen that they act as these amazing kind of absorbing panels in a way. So they really work well with the acoustics. So it's a large room, but it's not too live. I mean, you can hear that it's live, but it's not too echoey. To be honest, I'm making electronic music, so to be, blunt, it doesn't really matter in a way. And if your ears are used to working in a space like this, then it works.
Absolutely. And that's a beautiful space to have to work in and to live in. Did you have intentions to move to a large space in the countryside? What?
I just wanted one more room. I wanted one. I was living in East London. I'd moved there when it was very untrendy. And obviously over the next 15 to 18 years, it became very appealing to lots of people. And the prices accelerated, as they do in most popular cities. And I wanted to move, and anywhere I looked at that just had one more room to put things in was well over £1 million. And I thought, well, that's a month's wages. I can't spend all that at once. And there will be a lot of irony in this conversation, obviously, which I deliver.
I think I spotted that one.
That's good. But I'm always, you say these kind of things, and then some people come back at you and go, wow, man, he earns £1 million. The kind of thing. So
I'll tune in my irony radar.
Exactly. So moved here, and it was essentially somebody had made a conversion. They put floors in. There were no bathrooms, there were no kitchens or anything. Kitchens, I said plural, I only need one kitchen. But cut a long story short, I just wanted more space. I reached a point in my life and I thought, well, if I buy another book, I have nowhere to put it. If I buy another record, I have nowhere to put it. And this is silly at this point in my life. I can't just close all the doors to the joy of not only consuming, but learning and enjoying things around you. So instead found a place that was 10 times bigger for half the price. Moving here isn't really the countryside. I mean, the countryside is indeed 10 minutes away, but it does mean you get to listen to real bird song. You have doves who live outside your window and come and visit you every day.
Oh, lovely.
Every evening, 2 blackbirds come and visit and basically show you what they've caught to eat to take home to their family every single evening without fail. So simple but very blissful moments like that. And also, most importantly, it's really quiet here and it's really light. Because it's an old textile factory, wasn't built for living, it was built for working. So there are large windows all around. So you can kind of get an idea at the back there with the light coming
Absolutely,
through.
yeah.
But
It seems
the windows are about 3 meters high all the way around. So it's great to work in. It's really, I'm somebody who does not work at night. I work in the daytime. Therefore, having strong light works really well for my kind of system.
definitely. I think, yeah, I can see the light pouring in there. It's, yeah, really nice to work in that way. Yeah, I did. I did read about you. You said you like to wake up early and go to bed. So finish work at about 6 o'clock. What about that routine kind of works for you, and how did you settle upon doing things that way?
I annoyingly have always had a body clock that wakes up early. So not ideal with any partner in the past. You you wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning. Let's get the day started. And over the years, I'd kind of just accepted that's how it was going to be. And I realized I thrive on light. I can work much better in light. I very rarely work in music studios and don't necessarily enjoy those closed spaces where you lose all track of time and day. I like to stop around 5:30, not even 6 o'clock now. It's got even earlier. I'm turning into one of those old people who, when you have dinner at 4 o'clock.
Mhm.
But I finish at that time. But it means, I'm in the studio from 7:30, 8 o'clock at the latest, all day, working on a combination of administration, which seems to take up far too much time, and actual work. And it does mean you have the evenings free then, when you can meet friends, you can go out to the cinema, you can go to a concert, you can actually do things. And I've got friends who only work at night, and trying to meet them is not only a challenge, but I wonder, how do they get to do lots of the things that other people do? If you sleep half of your day, you're not only going to miss postal deliveries and simple things like that, but then the actual mechanics of how your life functions. But everybody has a different pattern, and it works for me. And I've had this pattern now for 35 years at least. And before that, I was working in jobs where I had to wake up early and go to a place to work and finish at a certain time. And I kind of like the discipline. I once read an interview with Ennio Morricone, the composer, who the question was asked, how do you manage to have such a high output? How can you possibly write 4 film scores in 1 month? And he said, well, I just, I get up and I just do it. I wake up and I do it, then I do the next one and the next one. It's mostly about kind of being disciplined and managing your time. And it's something I've been very good at. I would argue personally that I'm one of the laziest people around. I find myself incredibly lazy at times, and I'm not moving forward as I want to enough. And then I look back, because I've written a newsletter every month for over the last at least 26 years. I send it every month, and I write a kind of review of my month and realize I actually did quite a lot. But as with most of people, you're your own worst enemy. You get frustrated with yourself. You don't do enough things. You kind of potter around, and then again, pottering around is just as important as making things. It's the in between moments that can actually be just as valid as the actual solid moments of creativity, so to speak.
Yes, yeah, that I feel that really strongly. There's a lot of focus on like productivity at the moment and output, and I really truly believe that part of being productive is also, like you say, the time in between, not doing
Mm.
anything is so valuable. Um, yeah, you also talked about it being okay to procrastinate and do other things.
Yeah, I do. I mean, certainly with work, if I'm working on music and I'm not inspired or something, I just wander off. I maybe sit outside, I go for a walk, I listen to music, I read a book. There's no point pressuring yourself. It's not. I'm. I decided some years ago I'm not interested in working in, let's call it in inverted commas, the commercial business of music or anything, and therefore you don't address most of those pressures, which is about image, which is about timetabling, scheduling, touring, any of these things. In fact, the last time I toured was 2001. I made a trip from Mexico City right across to New York, and I played 21 concerts in 22 days.
Oh wow.
And in principle, before that began, I thought, this is extraordinary. What an opportunity. And it was. I got to meet some amazing people, visit some incredible places, and have some really fun memories. But I arrived in New York and I was utterly and completely spent. I'd had one day off in 3 weeks. And as you probably know, the only way you can actually make a living doing something like that is you have to take the cheap flight at the most impossible hour, stay in a hotel that's near the airport. So after the concert, you have to go way out. So you can't really hang around too much. So the actual mechanics were completely exhausting. So I got to New York and I was sitting outside the steps near St. Mark's Square in New York, outside the venue, in a kind of Ian Curtis Joy Division way with my head in my hands, thinking, what have I done with my life? What am I doing? Do I want to do this? And completely by chance, a friend of mine walked past from London who happened to be in New York and asked me how I was. And I answered very honestly. And I said, blah, 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 blah. And all this kind of misery came out of me that had been sitting inside for 3 weeks. And he just simply said, so why are you doing it? And I thought it was the perfect response. Why was I doing it? And I realized I didn't need to do that. I was following a model that's established at that time within music and any creative position. Basically, if you're a painter, you work towards your exhibition of your paintings at a gallery at a certain time. With a record, you work towards that recording, it's released, you follow that kind of pattern, and then you play concerts of that music. And I realized back in 2001 that just wasn't me. And it was actually very liberating to acknowledge that was not necessary. And of course, this is long before the advent of streaming culture and the way that changed that people both perform online and the way they consume music and so on. But it was a really revelatory moment to realize you don't need to sit within that system if it doesn't work for you. And you have to be happy. That's the most important thing.
Yeah, you have to enjoy what you're doing. I think when people are mainstream artists and they have to repeat the same performance night after night, that must be so difficult. And, yeah, I think you maybe perhaps set a very high bar for yourself. But yeah, it has to be fun, doesn't it? And I think one thing you've always done is kind of evolve and move forward with your work. And I would like to know how do you keep your creative process fun? Like, how do you do that? Because you have such a wealth of things that you've worked on, be it sort of dance pieces, installations, so much collaboration. Yeah, where do you generate the fun? Where does that come from?
I tend to say no to things that are too easy in a way. I tend to say no when somebody says, do you want to come and play a concert in this place? And I think, well, a few reasons. Why would I play that concert? Is it for just money? Is it for ego and exposure? These kind of things. And I think actually, no, I want to do the things that I haven't done before. Excuse me. So I tend to say yes to things where I have no answer, where I don't know what it's going to be, and I don't know how it will evolve. I mean, at the moment, I'm in a conversation with an Italian composer to work with a visual artist in the Netherlands about designing the sound and scoring a 1 hour soundtrack for an entire archive of photographs from a museum. These photographs are being glued together into one giant photograph using a special AI system. So it's thousands and thousands of photos that produce one giant 360 photograph. And it sounded such a challenge because it's over 16 speakers dispersed through the space. I thought, I've absolutely no idea how to do that. And the guy I'm working with said, I've never done anything like this. So we both said yes. And the budget is tiny. But I think where the fun has come in is not making decisions, if possible, upon budgets. Simply if something resonates and is interesting and is exciting and is challenging, then I say yes. And even if there's no money and the schedule works for me that I can still do it and I don't lose money, then I embrace the opportunity. So I realize that many of the opportunities I've had over my kind of 30 plus years of my career would not have happened if I'd been working with a manager and a record label, because they would be basically filtered through those systems that would never reach me. And very early on, I realized that wasn't for me. What I want to do is take risks and see what happens, and then you end up working in the most extraordinary situations or with the most incredible people. And it's also meant that my career somehow has connected in this weird nexus point between live performance and recording in a very musical way, but collaboration with architects and visual artists and all manner of bizarre and wonderful people, and somehow it doesn't stop. That's what strikes me as fascinating. It's if you can become not recognized necessarily, but people understand you're willing to take the risk and you can deliver, then it's a great conversation to have.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think is you I think your mind is so open to ideas and to opportunities. Like you say, if you'd have had a manager, then there would have been times for sure when they would have just not even shown you the email, so it's really cool that you did that. Was that a conscious decision you made like early on not to have a manager, and how has that been how has that worked for you when for some people I guess it wouldn't work?
I like just to be, I'm not a control freak, but I like to know where I'm going to be, what I'm doing, etc., etc. I don't like the feeling of missing an opportunity of working with somebody who's really fantastic, but they've come to me and said, I don't have any money, but I would really love to work on this thing with you. And it would be tragic if that opportunity was lost because sometimes they go on to other things. The irony of this conversation is I've worked on at least, I'd say, 4 or 5 projects with people who've come to me with no money. 3 of those are now very big Hollywood film directors who've never come back to me.
Wow.
Your kind of fantasy is, okay, we work together when you're a student and we make this work. And then when you have this success, why didn't you come back and talk to me? But no,
Pull
yeah,
me back in.
exactly.
Pull me back
So,
in
they've
again.
worked on films with, very famous actors and so on. But, that's a very different industry. It's an industry I've briefly tapped my toe into. If you can tap your toe into something, I don't know if you do it like that. But
Yes, you can
uh,
now.
but realize it's not necessarily a world I want to be in. I just watched that TV series, The Studio, on Apple, which is about the kind of the chaos and mechanics of how the American film industry works in a very eccentric way. And yet at the same time, it resonated in the feeling that I think this is really a picture of what really goes on. As we know in most industries, whether it's the fashion industry, whether it's the music industry, there's a certain part of that world you want no part of. It's just too
Yeah,
ugly, pressured, stressful, beyond comprehension, basically.
absolutely. Yeah, I've heard similar things from friends who are, sort of established producers who've worked on really high-profile projects with, what are still pop stars, and they've come away from it going, "No one knows what they're doing."
Yeah,
Like nobody knows what they're doing.
yeah,
You'd imagine because they're so high profile, it's so mainstream that there's some cohesion. But there's probably more cohesion in, like, the experimental
yeah.
stuff because it's a bit much more
I remember
free.
going to San Francisco in the 90s when the kind of tech industry was really kicking off. And a company contacted me and asked me to go there. So they flew me, not business class, but kind of next level up on economy. I went there. I had a driver picked me up in this ridiculously fancy car, drove me to this industrial area in San Francisco, which at the time was really evolving and people were really excited. And I went to this meeting and I could honestly have said anything and they would have all gone, wow, that's amazing, man. And I remember it was about some kind of award ceremony and they said, we'd like you to perform in it. What would you like to do? And I made some joke in my British way about we could have helicopters and we can have dancers coming off the helicopters. Basically, I'm anticipating the Olympics many years later. And they kept writing all this down, saying, cool, cool. And I thought, I'm joking. This can't really happen. And in the end, it never even happened. Literally, I just went home and I never heard from them again, probably because they sat there and thought, man, 6 helicopters, that's expensive. That's expensive. But it's modesty is much better. We don't need any helicopters. We can make great shows perfectly well in much more modest ways. But when you enter those kind of worlds and you realize that's a picture of how they really can be, then it's quite intimidating. It's really not. It's not something for me, and maybe it's not something for you, but maybe some people absolutely thrive on that kind of dynamic. It's
Yeah, it'd be nice. You've talked about a couple of places around the world. Where do you like to travel and play your music or take your recordings? Where do you find you flourish? What sort of countries and
mm,
spaces?
interesting question. I've traveled a lot. I think what's fascinating in a way is I realize I would probably not have been to some places were it not that work had brought me there. Would I have gone to Guangzhou? Would I have gone to Hanoi? Would I have gone to Kiev? Any of these places by choice? Perhaps not, or perhaps later at one point in my life. But there are places I love, but I never perform, which is ironic. For example, Germany and Berlin. I have no image, no projection at all there whatsoever. I'd love to go there more and have work. Vienna, I really like. Vienna is a really beautiful city. It's a small
very
but
grand,
very
isn't it?
compact creative industry. And the conversations that happen between fashion and design and architecture and music are really dynamic. And there's lots of collaborations that go on. And I find that really exciting. I'm off to Helsinki in the summer. It's kind of almost the summer now, but I'm off to Helsinki literally for one of those kind of trips to go and visit, to perhaps make a concert or give a talk, but also just to meet lots of other creatives and see if we can maybe conjure up something for the future, which would be great. But I do very much enjoy travel, an opportunity to explore and discover and just to kind of listen in a way. I remember the first time I ever went abroad, and I was about 18 or 19, and I went to Italy with a friend of mine. And what's funny, this would have been 1982, 1983, something like that. And I took my recording Walkman, and it was a little Sony handheld recorder. And I recorded so much of my trip on C90 cassettes. So from the moment we boarded the plane at Heathrow or Gatwick, wherever it was, through to checking in at the hotel, going to visit the beach, then going to Rome for the day, going to Florence for the day. And I recorded all these things. And it's really funny to think, quite early on, I was considering an idea of capturing sounds in spaces. I know before I went there, I kept thinking to myself, I wonder how different it sounds in other places. I wonder if the air feels different. And indeed, if you get off the plane and you're going through Singapore or something, as the door opens, that incredible heat that comes through is this incredible feeling, because it's like walking through a curtain and everything changes for a moment. And sound can also be like that. I remember going to Brisbane with a friend of mine many years ago, and he said, let's go to the rainforest. And we drove out there and we walked through, and I was expecting this really quiet, peaceful moment. It was absolutely deafening. It was like standing under a plane. It was so loud that just the wildlife was just phenomenal. I mean, it was just completely and utterly deafening. And those kind of revelations are fantastic. And that's one of the joys of traveling and having those kind of moments, both sonically, but also friend-wise. I mean, for me, life is about knowing other people and having friends. And to this day, one of the joys of making work, being creative, is establishing those kind of bonds around the world. And so I even don't know where most of my friends are from or how I know them, because chances are we met at a festival in New Zealand, or perhaps we were in Braga in Portugal together. I honestly don't know most times, but it's an absolute joy to have those connections that give you this wider picture of how the world works and connects.
Absolutely is now. And I think it's always been really important to kind of connect with people and draw from other worlds and other cultures. It's amazing.
Oh, there's the doorbell. Would you mind just 1 second?
Sure.
So I'm
Yeah,
just going to
take
take the
time.
headphones.
Yeah, no rush. No rush at all.
And headphones back in. Okay, sorry about that.
It's like a triathlon or something.
It is, because that was a 230 volt electrostatic fogger.
Oh, fantastic!
Which is it looks like something you would wear if you were in Ghostbusters. It's this big white device that fires out a special liquid that attaches to dust and mold in your building and puts an electrostatic charge. So then it takes the mold and dust and it drops it to the floor, and then you wipe it up. It's really
wow. That's hard.
Yeah, we've had mold problems here, so it's a very sophisticated. Sorry, I ran too much.
No, that's fine. I really want to talk about the the mold piece of equipment, just only because it's reminding me of Look Mum No Computer.
Oh, yes.
He's building a car at the moment, or he's building like multiple cars, and on his YouTube channel, he's showing. Yesterday, he put up a video of him building the engine, which is the most insane
Yeah.
thing I've ever seen. Like building a car engine. I watched it purely because I've never seen how a car engine actually works, and he goes from component A like all the way through and builds this
Wow.
car engine, and it's so spectacular. And what I was inclined to ask you, and I'm sure everyone is, whenever you talk about another piece of equipment, that whether you can plug it into your modular or you'd like
Yeah.
to record it. Does that cross your mind?
Yeah, people always ask ask. I mean, if I think back to one of the earliest recordings I made when I was a teenager, I was using vacuum cleaners and running them through echo units because I didn't have any instruments. I had a 4-track recorder, but I needed to make sound and I never had anything. So I took this old vacuum cleaner of my mum's and switched it on, and it had different speeds. So you could produce different melodies in a way to go.
Yeah, wow.
So I would just do that in time to make melodies. Absolutely ridiculous, you know. So to
That's
this day, of
superb.
course, when you're fascinated by sound, the idea of any new tool around the house is, can I use this musically? You know, I love those kind of things. Yes, so I just took delivery of a electrostatic fogger, which will help. I have to wear a PPE suit with mask and goggles and everything, and you fire this liquid. It fires up to 6 meters into the air, connects with the dust and mold, then falls to the floor, and then you have to wipe it up within a certain time. But it's very a mixture of kind of Blade Runner and Ghostbusters in some absurd moment. And inside you're sweating like crazy and the goggles are just fogging up. It's not the most pleasant of things, but the sound, maybe the sound's interesting. Maybe there's a great video coming on with me setting this thing up and firing it around the building.
Exactly. And I always found, the first time you hear laughter played backwards, it's
Mm.
such a dark sound, isn't it? Compared to the playing it forwards, it's such a happy sound.
Mm.
Yeah, I love the idea that, we can play sounds backwards, we can play them 2 octaves down or something, and it can really transform it.
And I'm going to say,
And
what's also interesting, if you take away laughter, that's really, really creepy. If you watch an episode of, I've seen them online, somebody's done it with things like episodes of Friends, and you
yes,
remove the canned laughter. So these lines are just delivered. And it's so eerie because everything feels so dark. They make some joke between each other, but there's no laughter at all. It's
I
just
think I
really
would love
sinister.
that.
Yeah.
I would love that purely because I don't enjoy watching Friends because I don't think some of the jokes are actually
Mm.
jokes; they're just normal lines. And I think I read once about Friends that they have canned laughter every sort of like 4 seconds or 7 seconds
I'm
or
sure.
something
Yeah.
really high. And I remember sitting in rooms as a student when everyone's watching Friends, and there's canned laughter, and I'm just sat there with like a completely straight face going, there's no actual joke there, it's just canned laughter after it. So I love that idea.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have a look at that and see. It's almost like the guy who took away the sound from music videos,
Mm.
like
Yeah, exactly. With the
the
Rolling
Prodigy and
Stones and these
Rolling
kind of things.
Stones,
Yeah.
Bowie. It's amazing what sound does to our perception and
Yeah.
experiences. Yeah, what sort of workshops and lectures have you done over the
So over
years?
the years, I've done not only spoken about my own work, but in the last few years, I've been working in Ravenna in Italy, running 2 different workshops. One on sound design for 3 days, and the other one on the use of the voice in performance, which is with a theatre company, actually, of all things, in Ravenna. And I work mostly with non-musicians. It's just people interested in using their voice. So sometimes actors, sometimes dancers, the occasional musician. So basically, over 5 days, it goes from I give presentations and then we do things together. So we sing together on the first day. So we work with kind of analog sound. And then over the days, we start working with resonant sound and hearing our voices under bridges, in different rooms, in the toilets, outside, seeing how the voice changes. And by the end of the week, we start recording digitally and processing the voice. So we move over 5 days from the analog voice to the digital voice and offering them tools in a way to both not only think, but how to create. and sharing lots of examples of artists who are using their voice within their work. So it could be everybody from Laurie Anderson to Diamanda Gallas. It could be pop singers. It could be Alvin Lucier looking at how resonant sounds work in a space with his piece, I Am Sitting in a Room, all kinds of things. So I've done that now for 3 years. And the sound design one is basically completely throwing sound designers, as they are called, but not necessarily. Sometimes they're just musicians who are interested in working with sound beyond the framework of a song, for example. And I throw them completely in the deep end and give them really hard challenges to work on. And one we just did, I was there just a couple of months ago, is we watched a film live and we made the soundtrack live only with our bodies and mouths, no instruments or anything. So there were things happening on the screen,
cool.
so people had to do this and this kind of thing. And I said, all you can do is play with pitch, reverb, and you can reverse it. We're going to use all the old-fashioned methods that people would have worked on sound back in the 60s, but no digital technology at all. The computer was only a tool to record with. And it was fantastic. It was so fun. And just a way of, there's that awful thing, and I'm as guilty at times as well, where you have too many plugins, too many channels. It's something I've always argued against, which is about being a reductionist in a way. I still to this day quote an article I saw in Sound on Sound some years ago, which was with the band Muse. And Muse said, on our next record, we are going back to basics. We're going to really just focus on the music and forget all these kind of elaborate kind of arrangements. And then they shared a screen grab of their Pro Tools session, and it was something like 99 tracks. And I thought, this is not going back to basics. So when I run these workshops, if we work together, we are recording in the same way that a rock or jazz band would have recorded in the 50s or 60s. We're in the same space, but we set ourselves up so these two microphones recording us can work out the distance. So if somebody has a louder voice, they stand further back. If somebody is quieter, they stand towards the front. We just arrange it in this way. So the workshops have been great because for me, I was absolutely terrified when they first came to me. Honestly, I thought I'm so out of my depth. I'm not a teacher. I have no education in this kind of world of sharing. And I said yes, because I thought if I don't do it, I would disappoint myself and maybe I can learn a lot from it. And in fact, the first sessions 3 years ago were very popular. And so much so that they said, the sound design course, not enough people could do it. Could you do it again? So I came back. And then this year, I've just done it again for the third time. And part of me thinks, should I take this concept, this kind of box of ideas, and do it somewhere else myself? Why just keep people waiting for 1 year in Ravenna only for Italians? But also it's free. That's the other thing worth mentioning. They don't have to pay anything to do it. It's funded by the local kind of authority, the kind of cultural money. So all the students need to do is ensure they can be there. So in a way, that's fantastic. They're not having to invest a large sum of money in it either. And I like that kind of encouragement. I mean, education is so key to who we are. I come from an age when you didn't have to pay to be educated. I could go to university and not have to think, oh boy, how am I going to pay that bill at the end of my study? And there was no bill. My biggest question when I finished studying was, what should I do now? How do I make a living doing this stuff that in my head all makes sense, but the real world doesn't offer a job that says these things in my head?
Yeah, that's a conundrum, isn't it? And often, I guess, uni students now are coming out of uni with sort of 50, 60,000 pounds worth of debt. Yeah, it's really crazy. It's kind of a different. I think when my dad told me that he didn't ever pay tuition fees at university, my jaw hit the floor.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, I feel very fortunate. It was sort of golden days in a way, and it just didn't put that pressure. It's a very different pressure for any young person to think, do I invest 3 years of my life to study this thing? And if I am going to study this thing, whatever it may be, it better be something I can use. So the idea of studying as I did, which was a modern arts course, which was a focus on English literature, but also a history of art, a history of philosophy, and a history of the visual arts, there's not a job waiting for you at the end. But if you're going to go off and study something like medicine in some way, you're probably thinking, oh, I'm going to move into being a doctor, or a nurse or whatever it may be. So, there was a much more liberal way of thinking about your life, in a sense, which sadly in the UK has been lost in that way. There's a very much a kind of shape that has to be formed within you when you're quite young. I mean, certainly, although when I was at school, when I was 16, you had to choose whether you were going to be moving into science or the arts. So at the age of 16, you had to decide whether you were going to do French and literature and painting or something, or you're going to go into the sciences, or you're going to leave and just do a job in the real world and actually make some real money. And I still remember at the age of 18, sitting in my English literature class. There was only two of us, two students, Richard and myself, reading T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. And I remember thinking, this is ridiculous. There are people out there doing things that have real meaning in the world, and I'm taking apart language in a poem from the 20th century that has no impact on anyone else. It's completely absurd, but I thrived on it. And it had great meaning for me in ways far beyond just taking a poem apart. It explored ways of thinking, ways of being rational, ways of being able to make conversation, ways of talking, ways of thinking through ideas, all these kind of things. And certainly before I went to university, I remember I'd go to the cinema with a friend and we'd come out afterwards and we'd go kind of, "Hmm, hmm." You'd wait for the other person to make their comment on the film. And then after being at university, it taught me that actually my point of view was as valid as the other person. So they might come out and say, I hated that film. That was so pretentious and awful. And then I would say, I thought it was one of the best things I've seen this year. But you could then start having a conversation about it. But before I went to uni, my brain wasn't formulated like that. And my way of thinking and the whole process of using language to explore what you feel didn't exist.
Absolutely, and I guess learning the structure and the construction behind other forms of art
Hmm,
form can inform your music and your sound
of
generation as
course.
well.
When I was 16, I kind of knew what I wanted to do, but there was no role in the world to do this. But I was interested in literature and sound and visual arts, but also theatre, but also movement, kind of performance art, and these kind of things. So my studies formed around this. So I studied English literature, but I also looked at poetry at the same time as painting from the same period. Same time, I looked at philosophy and the history of ideas. Everything all kind of connected on the same trajectory. And it's interesting because I realize now what I'm doing all these years later is making all those connections still. I go to
Mm.
see more visual art shows than I do music concerts. I buy more books than I do records. It's still kind of balanced in a way, this kind of interest. Tomorrow I'm in London all day at one meeting, but otherwise going to exhibitions. Almost every week I just go and see exhibitions all day. If you ask me how many concerts have I seen recently, I've probably seen two concerts in the last year. It's terrible. But then again, I've seen a lot, a lot in the past. Not that that qualifies, but I've seen a lot of, or heard a lot of music.
You did talk about being reductionist earlier about when you're doing your workshops, and yeah, it'd be great to know when do you allow yourself to, let's say, for example, get a new piece of music equipment, for example, with that
Mm.
reductionist mindset. When do you allow the purchase?
Haven't bought anything in ages. I look around thinking, the only things I bought are secondhand usually. I would buy something like a guitar pedal to kind of test it out. I haven't bought anything significant in a long time. In a way, the tools are all here already for me to make stuff. And perhaps a new toy, in a way, is just an excuse because you're not focusing well enough. I mean, the truth is, things I own, there is so much more one can do with it. There are so many layers beneath it, whether it's modular, whether it's hardware synth, whether it's software. So often we just use the surface level, and that can be enough. But I sometimes feel I want to learn so much more about it. So, in fact, when I first bought a Macintosh computer, and I remember paying something like £2,500 for one back in like 1988 or something like this. And it was so expensive. I remember I bought it from Selfridge's department store in the West End of London, and they delivered this thing. And I remember feeling sick in my tummy when this giant box arrived, thinking, what have I done? So I bought this book, this manual that was enormous, about 800 to 1,000 pages, like a brick, and read it from start to finish so I could completely understand how the computer would work, because I had no experience whatsoever with computers. So to this day, I tend to still read manuals as much as possible and watch a lot of tutorials online, because I want to learn how the things that I already own work, you know. Proof of how things progress. I mean, the last thing I probably bought was a microphone. I bought a geophone microphone, the kind of microphones you use to record earthquakes. So you attach it to something like a sheet of metal, so it doesn't pick up your voice or cars passing by. It just picks up the kind of movement, the resonances. So behind me, you can't quite see it here, there's a stainless steel staircase that floats from the top of the building to the lower ground floor. And it's held with about a dozen stainless steel poles, but it feels like it's floating. It scares some people when they walk on it.
Oh, wow.
But it sounds like rainfall when you walk up and down it. And I thought,
that's nice.
what a great idea to make a record from this. You know, let's just try and record it. And in fact, I just finished it last week. So I had things like, it's quite funny. I have a giant brush that you use for cleaning behind radiators. And it's a very practical tool. But I thought, if I move it between parts of the staircase, it produces this incredible kind of vibration. And I just recorded that, and I recorded another sound, and I put them together, and I just put them through a resonator and thought, that's enough. It doesn't need any more. So I finished this album, which is going to come out in September this year, which is only recordings of the staircase. And there are no instruments on it at all. And every track has one track has four tracks on it, but that's it. It goes nowhere beyond 4 tracks. I think there's 5 tracks on the album. 2 of them, there's just 1 track. It's just live. That's all it is. Yes, it's not a new Christmas #1 album. It's like a kind of very meditative piece. But the story was told. It didn't need to have any more added to it. And in fact, if I added more to it, it felt untruthful to the story I was trying to tell, which was about the stainless steel staircase and the beautiful sounds it can emit and the vibrations it makes. And if I used anything else, that felt fake in a way, like I was almost lying to myself and to an audience that might hear it, because it didn't feel authentic. And so, yeah, I've always been a reductionist. I've always tended to try and remove stuff. Having said that, I have a lot of musical tools around me, and I'm going through a process now of having been here 10 years, thinking 10 years is exactly the time to think about, if I haven't used this in a certain length of time, maybe it's time to get rid of it. So I'm thinking of having a clear out in a way, but I don't want it to be a regretful clear out where you sell something and then you think, oh, that would have been great. So I'm going to go through the process in the next months of plugging everything in one at a time and seeing what they do. And if it really does give me reward, and if it doesn't, then somebody else can get the joy of it.
Yeah, I think that's such a great way of looking at it, that someone else can get the joy out of it, because you see that joy. If it's not on eBay and you're actually handing it to the person, you see the joy in their face lighting up with it that possibly you don't necessarily have anymore. I think that is a wonderful new spark for people. Yeah, you also talked about Benj and how he's influenced your modular adventures. Yeah, when did you first get to know
So
Benj?
I know him from a long time ago, from at least 25 years ago. Benj had a studio on the corner of just off Carnaby Street in London. His girlfriend at the time had a clothing shop and was selling these kind of sort of things like very kind of fairy tale like clothing that lots of Japanese tourists would go and visit. And you went down this narrow staircase, and in the basement were all these amazing musical toys. And that was Benji's world. And I know him through another friend, basically, as with most of our lives, you know somebody through somebody else, and the spiral goes on. And we remained friends. And then where I lived in East London, in Bethnal Green, his studio was just down the road. So I could just wander 10 minutes down the road and go to the basement and go to this incredible playground. and see what was going on there. And when I first got interested in kind of modular and more things like that, he'd come and visit and show me how to use certain things and have tips, this kind of thing. But he's a super nice guy. I mean, he's now a part of Cabaret Voltaire, which he said to me is the strangest thing ever. He would never have imagined as a teenager listening to this music that now he'd be forming part of the band for their future concerts, which is a fantastic idea. But he's a great person. He's a great educator in a way as well. He has this YouTube channel, which you might be familiar with, which is
Yeah,
very
it's
playful,
amazing.
but it's so Benj, down to his haircut and his glasses. Everything is just so perfectly, on point in a way. And I remember he said to me a while ago, he said, people may be getting obsessed about buying all these beautiful old analog pieces of gear that need lots of work. The future's in digital. So he started buying up really cheaply lots of Roland and Korg synths that nobody wanted. And he's always been very good at that, of kind of preempting what might be of interest, and picking them up, because you can still pick up some fantastic old Roland synths for £70. Whereas you think, I think I just want to get an Oberheim. Sorry, that will be 21,000. So there's quite a big difference.
Absolutely, yeah. His meme tune TV show is amazing. It's brilliant because it straddles really amazing synth work and real mastery of the equipment, alongside deliberately awkwardly acted stuff that reminds you of like 1970s television.
The shuffling of the papers is fantastic. When he does the thing at the beginning, a bit like a newsreader, and he shuffles them, it's so fantastic.
Yeah, he's amazing, and I think he's also, like you've mentioned, a lot of you've been involved with a lot of visual work, and a lot of the stuff you're going to see is visual. I think he's really embraced the visual side of things with his hardware kind of controllers.
And we keep talking about going for a London date just to go and see exhibitions together, because he never has the chance because he lives down in Cornwall. So his trip is something like 5 hours to London. Mine's 50 minutes. So it's quite a significant challenge. So we haven't got the date set yet, but now he's heavily in rehearsals, to be a rock and roll star.
That's brilliant. It would be really interesting to talk about something that happened that you did in 1999, which was a lookalike show.
Yes.
Yeah. So you soundtracked Alphaville by Jean Luc-Goddard. What can you tell us about that lookalike show? It just sounds like such a fascinating idea.
So 1999 was quite a busy year already. I was still working with a proper record label. So there was a schedule. I was still in let's call it the system. I hadn't escaped the system. So it was anticipated that I should tour with this new record. The name of the record in itself is a good story. The album was called Lauvarm Instrumentals. And basically, I was recording and I was working on this record, and I had a review for a previous record, and it said, all this hype about this scanner music it's just crap. This record is just a collection of lukewarm instrumentals. And I thought, what a great title, Lukewarm Instrumentals. So I spoke to the label at the time, and they said to me, it's a terrible title. It's too negative. People won't understand the playfulness of it. So I simply changed it to the German and Dutch equivalent, Lauwarm. So it became Lauwarm Instrumentals. And then immediately, as soon as the record came out, people would say to me, what a beautiful title. Where did it come from? So that's quite a funny story in itself.
That's amazing.
But then I was just moving home, and I was living out of cardboard boxes, basically. I'd been living in a very strange way. I had broken up from a long-term relationship. My belongings were in a storage place in King's Cross in London, and I lived in Liverpool in a hotel. Wow. Very decadent. And I had a residency as a kind of visiting artist at John Moores University. So I'd make music and give talks to students and these kind of things. Lived in a hotel because it was cheaper than renting a flat, I discovered, which is completely perverse. Liverpool has changed a lot price-wise since then. So I had nowhere to live. I came to London, and then the record was coming out. And at the time, I was also running, these stories all interconnect. I'm sorry it's so complicated.
No, it's brilliant.
I was also running a club called the Electronic Lounge, which ran at the ICA in London, the Institute of Contemporary Arts. It ran from 1995 to 2000. Every month, the first Tuesday of every month, this event happened. And it ran from 9 o'clock till 1 o'clock in the morning. and cost £1 to get into. And I had nights, one of the earliest nights was Warp Records releasing their Motion VHS tape. People like Aphex Twin and all these kinds of people DJing. Had a night with Sarko Records from Finland, Erdar Records from London, Mago Records from Austria. So people would come through. It would be a big social gathering. Nobody got paid. The important thing was that everybody was on the same level. I earned nothing from it. No artist did. It was all about friendship. It was one of those events. It cost £1 to get into, so there was no profit to be speaking of. Everybody had their travel paid, taking care of where they stayed, their food, but there was no kind of profit. It was a very important thing to kind of recognize. And it was promoted on a way that was the event happens on the first Tuesday of the month. It's the electronic lounge, but we don't tell you what's going to be on. So you'll be surprised when you turn up and suddenly find, oh, look, there's Richard James spinning some records, or there's whoever. That was the whole point of it. So that was also happening at the same time. So 1999 was this kind of mad year. At the electronic lounge, this guy came up to me with his girlfriend and said, I live in Miami and people often mistake me for you. And I thought, poor guy to start with, that's a torture. But then I thought, hey, and I jokingly said to him, so I could play in, LA or Miami or whatever, and you could play it for me. I wouldn't need to travel there. And we laughed about it and thought, what a great gag that was. And we stayed in touch. And I started to think, well, if I collected together enough people, I could make a kind of international tour. So on the 16th of May, 1999, I made a tour and I played 16 concerts in one night. And I just had different people who looked a bit like me, including a woman in Vienna who just had kind of cropped hair. There were no concert tickets sold for this, so nobody was ripped off. They were free events. So they were promotional events for the album. And literally, I made a DAT tape. I made a DAT with the tracks and different versions of them and sounds in between. So it felt like somebody was playing live, and they could add or subtract whatever they wanted to live and make the performance however they wished. And they just did it. They did it all on the same day. And it's quite, the funny, the NME, New Musical Express at the time, then made a post about it and kind of a review. And one person reviewed the concert, which I thought was fantastic. And of course, the thing after that was quite interesting, is whenever I played shows for a while, people were really nervous it wasn't going to be me. They thought it was going to be somebody impersonating me. So I thought that was quite amusing. I mean, there are people who've done this. I mean, there's an Italian artist, Maurizio Catalan, who has made some very playful and extraordinary sculptures over the years of things like the Pope being struck and lying on the ground. Last year there was a big news story you may have heard it, of a gold toilet that was stolen from Blenheim Palace.
Yes.
So he made that, a gold toilet, basically saying it doesn't matter how rich you are, when you go to the toilet, we are all on the same level. And he used to get people to do interviews for him or even be him at press fairs and everything, but not himself. He used to get a friend to turn up because they didn't know what he looked like. Because often in the visual arts, you don't know what people look like. And I played with that idea for a while. I was working around the same time I went to Paris. I was working on a project in Paris. And when I got to Paris, I had a message from DJ Magazine in the UK. And they phoned me and said, and they couldn't have phoned me because I never had a phone then. But they must have messaged me somehow and said, can we have a photo of you? I didn't have any photos with me, but what I did have was a photo of the guy who was meeting me on my computer. So I just emailed them a photo of a complete stranger. The irony being that the guy was black, and I'm clearly, a very pale white guy. And I sent it to the magazine and said, "Here's the photo," and they published it. And I think they were just too uncomfortable with the idea of contacting me and saying, can we ask you? Can we just check that you're, this really is you? Yeah. It was a very stupid but playful thing. I told the guy, I said, do you mind? He said, no, this will be funny. So for a while, I did this kind of thing, playing with image and seeing how far you could take it.
Yeah, such a fantastic idea. It kind of reminds me when you're talking about changing the name or using the review in the title of your work. The way Daft Punk's name came about, where somebody reviewed their early stuff before they weren't called Daft Punk, and they said their music sounds like a Daft Punk, and that became their name.
Yeah.
Like,
It's great. I mean, it's often
brilliant.
I came up with the term flaneur électronique because often people would say to me, "What type of music do you make?" And so a flaneur in French is somebody who just kind of wanders through the town or the countryside, and they just with their kind of their walking stick and just looks around. And electronic, as in electronic music. So I just said flaneur électronique, and every now and again it just appears in articles. And it's funny how you can feed this machine, and years later it comes back at you without you even remembering how it even started at times.
Yeah, I think that's wonderfully, yeah, wonderfully playful way of being. Some people are very, I don't know, a little bit businesslike about music and a little bit controlling
Mm.
over PR, and I think it is fun to do those
Mm.
things. I mean, Aphex Twin is legendary for playing
Yeah,
around.
Richard's had great fun with that over the years. I mean, really, he's one of the kind of key characters in that kind of world that's willing to take those risks, and those risks have paid off dividends. He's taken it to such an extreme. He was playing concerts with people dressed up as teddy bears at one point, just dancing around the stage. Because the truth is, Richard couldn't play that music live. It wasn't quite possible unless you took out your entire studio and sequencer, and he just basically couldn't be bothered. So you can play a DAT tape and get these people jumping around, and it's just as much fun. And then later on, you have other bands. Is it Fever Ray? Was it Fever Ray? Did they make a performance where they basically mimed to a backing track, which upset a lot of people, but it was all about the kind of dance performance around it. So people play with image, and I think it's fascinating how you can today, even more so, you can play with kind of the aura of who you may be. I'm not in a pop world, but the pop world is fascinating for seeing how people play with image, but that pressure on you to maintain that kind of innovation or that image is so heavy. I couldn't bear to live that kind of life in a way.
Yeah, and I think the way you've opened up the entry level for people who do want to make music or who do want to experiment, like having those workshops in Italy that are free
Mm,
with people who aren't to do with sound, like and recording your own stairway, your own your staircase. That's there's an entry level to art that is it's accessible, isn't
mm,
it? And it is there, but I think it takes people like yourself to remind people that art is kind of all around us,
mm.
and fun and magic is
Yeah, it's
everywhere.
very easy to assume that I need to invest X amount of money to make this thing happen when generally you don't. Some of the greatest visual works were a pencil and a piece of paper. That's how they began, and that's sometimes how they finish. These incredible sketches and drawings. It doesn't necessarily have to come from great, you know, bank account, bank accounts or something. My all the early music I made was made so cheaply, so cheaply, and to this day I still pretty much buy nothing new. Almost everything I buy is secondhand because I like that kind of that recycled world where it's gone through maybe three or four other people before me, and at some point it will go on to somebody else. There's this interesting kind of movement that happens with equipment.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm sure you've got equipment that's been passed to you from other
I've
people
got
that has stories
yeah,
connected
this
with it
is
as well,
Richard
right?
James's Buchla, his old
Oh wow,
Buchla synth, and I could pretend to say this is
amazing.
Hans Zimmer's, but it's not. That's mine, and
I think that is something that fascinates us. I mean, speaking of the millennium and telling stories, I've just watched the Adam Curtis series, Shifty. I don't know if
I haven't
you've
seen it.
seen any of
No,
Adam Curtis' work. Oh, he is amazing. But like he's weaving stories about things, and I think whenever there's music gear, if there's a story behind it, it just adds so much more mystique.
of course, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting how you know, people. I've never done it, but they give their cars names, and they give their gear names. So they say, "Let's go and get in." I don't know,
Gertrude.
Gertrude. Yeah, exactly. And there's that kind of personification of objects is really fascinating. I don't think I have any gear and say, "I'm just going to go and pick up Harriet and we're going to make some music together." It would be a little perverse. I'd rather call it by its name.
I feel the same way. Me and my sister used to share a car, and she called it Phoebe, and I hated that idea. I know it's not called
Maybe
that.
because you just didn't like Friends. That was it.
True,
Yeah. So
absolutely.
resonant.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well remembered. Yeah, yeah. It could have been. It probably was largely down to that. It was sort of college days.
Mm.
Yeah, just to kind of wrap up, Robin, thanks so much for speaking to me. It's
Pleasure,
been really,
absolutely.
you're such a pleasure to speak to.
Oh,
I just don't feel like I'm doing like work, or I always feel like I'm failing as an interviewer. This is like always my thing that happens during the interviews. But yeah, it's really fun to talk to you, man. It's an
oh.
absolute pleasure.
But failure is also important. You're not failing, but failure is also important to recognize. I've always tried to encourage going to experience things that are not necessarily your bag, so to speak. I had friends years ago, and I remember saying to her, I said, look, sometimes it's good to go to a concert and realize why you don't like that concert. Or I was listening to a record yesterday that got a 4-star review in The Guardian, best album of the month in electronic sound a while ago. And I listened to it and just thought, this is awful to my ears. It's
Mm.
absolutely awful. But for many people, it's the best thing they've heard in ages, and that's the absolute joy of being alive, is that kind of friction and difference. If we don't have difference, what have we got in a way, and positive difference, not negative difference, but, embracing difference is so, so important for all walks of life in a sense. And, in my life, that's what I look forward to, are those kind of things that sometimes disturb me or unsettle me or inspire me. I mean, I just went to see this film, The Ballad of Wallace Island, very low key British film. And I thought it's probably just going to be this kind of slightly disposable, almost you'd see it on TV on a holiday film, this little kind of low key film. And it was absolutely beautiful. It was so tender and it was so beautifully delivered. And there's such a level of kind of melancholia which exists within British music and culture that just sits under the surface. It's so funny but heartbreaking at the same time. And I love those kind of moments which shift how I perceive something when I go and see it. And yet another time I'll go and see something that everyone's raved about, and you sit there and think, why? Why? What's going on? I don't get it. I don't get it.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I love those surprising
Hmm.
experiences, those sort of what's round the corner, and you're hot, like your mood or your
Yeah,
day or your week has completely changed from those small
exactly.
things. Yeah. You run a radio show,
I
Earspace.
do. Ear space.
Yeah. What can you tell us about that? How long have you been running that for?
Just over 2 years, and it's with Slack City down in Brighton and Manchester. So it goes on the proper radio airwaves, but also digital. It was just a bit of a dream in a way to have a radio show where I can play music from other people and support them and share it with other people and talk about it, not just have a playlist. So I do research and I talk about the music, sometimes share stories when I know the people or know something about the history of it. It's only 2 hours every month. I say only 2 hours. It takes me well over a day to actually make it each month. But again, it goes back to there's no budget. You don't make money from this. What I get is access to new music. So now a few more people send me music, which is fantastic because I just always want to hear new music. And it's just a good feeling to support and share something you love. I mean, I use Instagram for the same reason. My Instagram channel, I realized a while ago, didn't need photos of me in all my favorite outfits, standing by the door posing. What I could do was share my enthusiasm for books and music and stories and figures that I felt deserved exposure more so than other people in a way. And it's been thriving on that. And I don't mean that, it's not any kind of hipster, I've got this number of followers. It's about a way of support and sharing, and that's what life again should be about. Is, I mean, you're doing this, and I agree to do it because this is not selling my work. We're talking about ideas here. I don't need to hold up products or anything. It's not about that. And in fact, the reason the reason that, how can I put this clearly, a reason I did not get into making music was to sell product. I wasn't interested in selling a product and having a record and being successful by it. The records and any CDs and etc. are in a way postcards that simply say Mr. Scanner is still alive. This is what he's doing. There was never any intention of making money. And if they break even, that's fantastic. And sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. So the radio show fits into that kind of ecology of uh, belief in others and helping them to move forwards in a way. And if people discover new music through it, that's the best thing of all.
It's amazing, and you're absolutely right. Your Instagram and your Twitter and your online profiles, you share some really, really amazing artwork,
Oh,
films,
good.
books, and I've certainly enjoyed them over the years, and maybe stolen a couple of them for Sonic State
Great. Yeah.
stories over the years
Good.
too.
Yeah. That's it. I mean, it's great to be enthusiastic about the world still. We're living in increasingly turbulent times. And ever more so, it feels like if we can find things that create bonds between people, make connections, and keep conversations happening, that's what's really important. So, I like to do things like this because they're a way of sharing ideas. The thing I'm least interested talking about, to be quite truthful, is gear. And when people come to me and want to talk to me about how something works, or what's my experience with this, or what do you think about the CV gates on this, and it,
Mm.
it, it it's not a story that I want to necessarily follow through. Sometimes I'm interested in the outcome. I'm interested in the relationship between people and how we all live together towards this future that we hopefully still have.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad that I didn't dig into all of your gear too much today. I think I share that feeling of the process and the ideas behind it and the concepts. They're the fascinating things, not necessarily like the difference between sampler A and
Yeah, I
sampler
don't need to
B.
know what camera David Lynch used and what lens and what lighting rig he used on Eraserhead. I can embrace that moment and that work in itself.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think you're right about we are sort of living in unstable times I don't know how to describe it, but art is a great way of just uh, experiencing the joy and the beauty in life.
Completely.
Yeah, and the voices of other nations as well. I
Mm,
think we often get very one-sided stories and whatever into the public
mm.
consciousness, but there is a whole world happening out
Of
there as
course,
well
yeah.
with lots of amazing things going on. Well, thank you so much for speaking to me today,
My
Robin.
pleasure,
It's been
absolutely, yeah.
really, really great. Is there anything that you would like to draw people's attention to that's coming up, or that you've done in the past that you think you'd like people to investigate? I mean,
Uh,
your output is prolific. I've written down everything you did
Goodness.
last year and this year, and it's just so impressive. But yeah, is there anything you'd like to draw people's attention to that
I
you're
mean,
up
just
to?
if they want to communicate with me, I respond. So they can drop me a message. Excuse me, they can drop a message online. I will respond. They can make comments on social things. That's it. I'm not here to promote things I've done because they will have their own systems of promotion as they follow through. But next year, I have a huge project opening in London, which is exciting, a permanent piece in a museum with over 5,000 hours of audio
Wow,
and over 40 speakers. It's a huge project. So I'm working on that almost every day for the next year. So that will come to
amazing.
fruition. Yeah, it's really exciting. We can talk about that another day. That's a fantastic thing. But that's also celebrating the voices and the stories of London as a city, which is great.
Yeah, well, that sounds absolutely fantastic. Yeah, well, everyone at Sonic State really appreciates what you
Oh,
do, Robin, and what you continue to do. You inspire so many
oh,
people,
thank
so
you.
thank you for doing what you do.
And thank
And
you, Solid State. Solid State? It's Solid State. Thank you, Sonic State. Really, I mean, an absolute pleasure.
yeah, thank you for contributing to the 30th anniversary video. That was really
Apologies for the
nice to.
wallpaper. So
Oh, it's great
yeah, it's
wallpaper. It's
my
great.
in-laws, where I was speaking and they were downstairs and they could hear everything I said. So I was so self-conscious of talking into my phone like this, with them hearing every word as I stand next to this wallpaper. Yeah, tricky indeed.
No,
The challenges I go
it-
through in my life, they're enormous.
well, yeah, it's greatly
Oh,
appreciated, Robin.
fantastic.
Yeah, thanks. Have a wonderful rest of the day, and enjoy your ghost busting, your mole ghost
You
busting.
wait till I'll put the pictures online so you'll see them.
Wow, great to speak to Robin. Always a pleasure. He's just such a friendly and open person. I couldn't quite believe it actually when I first met him, how nice he was. Yeah, lovely guy, and what a wealth of things he shared there with us. Yeah, I love his approach to working with people, to collaborating, to new projects. He's one of those people that's sort of ever evolving, doesn't stay doing the same thing, which is great for him. It's great for his audience. And yes, we salute you, Robin. Thank you so much for speaking to us today. I'm going to recommend an episode which is with Aid Fenton. He is the manager of Gary Newman. I spoke to Aid Fenton a couple of years ago now, but we get a great insight into his relationship with Gary, the albums that he's worked on with Gary Newman, and all sorts of other shenanigans from the techno scene as well, which are worth listening to. Don't forget, you can support Sonic State on Patreon. It helps us keep doing what we do, and it's greatly appreciated. So head over to sonicstate.com/Patreon to share a few quid a month. It's greatly appreciated. Okay, that is it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you again soon.